Secret tax hikes as the start of a new tax year sparked a fresh battle over their respective economic plans. Video has emerged which apparently shows IS militants moving into a Syrian refugee camp on the outskirts of Damascus. Let's get more on those pension reforms today, and we can speak to Chris Leslie, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Welcome to Sky News. You must welcome these reforms. Some people would say that they're long overdue.
Well, I think it's important that we see changes that help savers, and I think sometimes these annuity products were very rigid. We're slightly worried, though, that the guidance that people need has been very sort of hastily cobbled together. In fact, I'm told that the Pensions Wise, the organisation that's supposed to be available to give advice to those now retiring, has only been brought together in the past couple of weeks. And there's also been a record number of complaints, I think, to the Information Commissioner about people sort of being sold products on pensions and so forth. So I think we've got to be very careful that we don't find ourselves being complacent about the risks of mis-selling. We know that PPI was a big problem for very many people, and I think this situation, could potentially be a risk in terms of mis-selling. So we've got to guard against that as well.
But don't you think when Labour were in power, they should have done something to address this issue? Because I know for years people were complaining about the very low annuity rates.
And of course, we've had a situation with annuity rates for quite some time. I mean, I think pensioners are not all the same. Some pensioners do have savings, but quite a lot don't. And over the last 5 years in particular, we've seen some changes affecting pensioners in quite a significant way. Remember, George Osborne introduced what was then became known as the granny tax, where he froze that allowance for people entering retirement. And of course the big tax change that hit pensioners was the rise in VAT, and that VAT increase, I think, is something that we're reminding the Conservatives and the country about today. They don't want to talk about what's been happening over the full 5-year period. They just want to focus on the last minute 11th hour giveaways and gimmicks that they've got just before the election.
I mean, but the reality is that most people aren't going to touch their pensions. They've spent years building them up. They're going to wait to see these changes bed in. They're going to think about it. They're not in any rush to cash them in, are they?
Well, I think everybody has to make sure that they get good advice and guidance, and that's very important too. The other thing, of course, that I think a lot of people will be wary about is if they're going to get hit by very high fees and charges on some of these drawdown products. Now, I don't think that the government have done enough on this. We should be capping those fees, making sure that there is a limit to how much can be sort of creamed off by those companies in that particular way. And so we'd want to consult and make sure we get that cap in place.
So if Labour were to get back into office next month, what would Labour do apart from the caps? You wouldn't reverse these changes?
No, we want to make sure that there is more freedom for people in terms of getting access to their savings. But I think first things first, let's have a proper working group of not just government departments, but also the regulators to clamp down on the mis-selling risks that I think are, there's some sense that these might be around. Second of all, make sure that we have a proper cap on those fees so that pensioners aren't being ripped off. Ultimately, I think we've got to stand up for people who perhaps have been saving for a very long time as well, but not forget the fact that there are lots of other pensioners out there who have been hit by some of the tax increases and the reductions in other benefits, for example, that the Conservatives have instituted over the last 5 years.
Well, the government is saying that if people were to run out of money, they have this new enhanced flat rate pension they can fall back on that's not means tested.
Well, I mean, look, I don't think that when the typical retired household, the pensioners, look at whether they are better off now than where they were 5 years ago, they will be thinking this is a great government for them, particularly because of what's been happening in VAT. And actually, a lot of retired people are also grandparents too, and they'll be worried about the next generation. And younger people, I think, have really felt a lot of the pain over the last 5 years, particularly when you look at what's been happening on tuition fees and what's been happening in terms of the epidemic of insecurity in the jobs market. I think a lot of young people are facing real problems, and that is a concern for grandparents and for older people too.
Chris Leslie, thank you very much for talking to Sky News. The SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon, has been out and about launching her party's